Welcome, everybody. I am Ari Kaplan. I am an analyst that covers legal, and I'm honored today to be facilitating this conversation, a critical leap forward, how AI and open source intelligence are redefining risk and opportunity in legal operations. I'm honored to be joined by Scott Angelo, the Chief Information Officer at Buchanan, Ingersoll and Rooney, AJ Singh, the Vice President for North America at Before AI, and Matt Winlaw, the CEO and Managing Director at ID and EDD Group. Scott, AJ, Matt, wonderful to see you.
Thanks, Ari. Good to be
Thank
here.
you. Thanks all.
So I'm so privileged to be joining you today for this conversation. Over the last few weeks, I have been lucky to convene discussions in New York, Palo Alto, Dallas, Atlanta, and other cities with leaders at law firms, in corporate legal departments, talking about not only artificial intelligence, not only legal operations, but especially that the foundational issue that a lot of these organizations are having is security and their data hygiene, data security. And as we'll talk about, there's a very interesting escalation of cyber attacks that is occurring. And in my own research, I am finding that the concern over security is really rivaling a lot of the concerns about artificial intelligence, where we are. And so, Scott, given your vast experience in this area, I'd like to just start and ask you, how can law firm leaders, as a level set, how do they leverage artificial intelligence to better anticipate or manage the risks that they're facing in this moment?
Yeah, so it's a relatively easy answer, and that is, when we're thinking about cyber, right, and we're thinking about AI and the applicability for that, right? Well, we all know that it does so many things on the other side of the house from an IT perspective. So to bring those over to the cyber space, one would think that it's easy. And it helps us do those like kind of three things: detect, respond, recover. So when I think about that, AI allows us to do those three things more efficiently than we've ever done before. It provides us with very timely, relevant, and actionable information. And again, information at a level and degree that we've never had before. And I think, we'll get into that. So I'm just going to briefly touch upon the why, or what has that enabled. It has allowed us today to do triangulation like we've never done before. It allows us to tap into as many data sources as we have, the types of data that we want to. We used to be kind of confined to maybe structured and semi-structured. Now, totally unstructured. It could be an image, it could be a video, it can be. So the combination of the data sources and our ability to quickly analyze, summarize, prioritize, and things of that nature is the reason why it's an imperative that we do this. I'll use the expression, "Don't bring a knife to a gunfight," and the bad guys are employing all of these things to do the same thing, right? So they can quickly identify opportunities that they can exploit and better ways to do that. So we have to have these same capabilities to be able to fend off so that we can anticipate and focus our energies where they need to be and where we're going to get the most value. AI absolutely. Yeah.
So AJ, Scott talked about this idea of being able to detect, respond, recover, that it offers timely, relevant, actionable information. And then we're at this sort of inflection point, this unprecedented triangulation of data. But what is the role of predictive threat intelligence and behavioral AI in this process of preempting legal risk?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So when you're looking at AI, most of the noise in the media is really around generative AI, right? Which is I can take vast amounts of data and I can analyze that and I can put together things that sound coherent, right? So basically, what generative AI is says, "Hey, I look at these patterns and these words usually go together, right?" So it can give you something that sounds plausible and it sounds accurate, right? Predictive AI also looks at data sets, right? But instead of like looking at, vast amounts of data on the internet, you're providing it specific, meaningful information, right? In our case, we look at the way that the internet changes over time, right? So we're taking information about servers and routing information and what's being hosted and the relationship between different entities and then providing it also information on what is known good and what is known bad, right? And so as things change over time, we can say, is something trending positively or is it changing negatively? And then we can make that prediction, right? So predictive AI really, at its essence, is basically looking at vast amounts of data over time and deciding, is it going to be something that's going to be moving in a positive light or a negative light? And then making that determination preemptively before whatever it is before like the phishing site pops up or the ransomware, command and control pops up. So there's really, a couple nuances to AI. When people say AI, you really have to ask them what specifically are you talking about?
And who's making, you mentioned that making that determination, discussing known goods, known bads, and making a determination. Who specifically in the organization is making that determination?
Yeah, so I mean you have to feed it with ground truth, right? So we can look at, Amazon.com, right? Or, Yahoo.com, whatever else, and say, hey, this is what good infrastructure looks like versus something that has been known to host phishing or ransomware, and then you train the AI, right? So there's this concept of AI drift. The more information you give it, the further it may get from actually understanding what the truth is. So you have to make sure that the AI models are trained repetitively. We train our model twice a day.
Scott, I just want to return to you for one quick second just to say, like, is there a level of skill in firms today where they could adapt this quickly to this kind of need in terms of recognizing the information and processing it and leveraging the technology as rapidly as it needs to be processed?
It all depends, right? It depends on the appetite of the organization on, what are they willing to pay for from a labor perspective. There are people out there that you can hire, you can bring into your fold, and that they can do these things, right? But that's kind of where I think we'll talk a little bit about buy versus build.
Yep.
You know, you have the opportunities now, right? People are advancing, and their tools will provide you with potentially a gap that you have in your program today. So my point being there is you can either hire for it, you can build it, or you can buy, and the solutions seem never ending, right? Every day, it's not a handful, it's dozens and dozens of new products on.
Well, I'd like to just put an open call here. I've looked at some of the attendees who I know are listening today. I and the panelists would love to be interactive. So if you have a question, there's a Q&A pane, and please ask us. We'd love to be responsive. It's not often you get this level of skill. These panelists are extraordinary, and I think it'd be great to have a dialogue here. And Matt, I want to turn to you for a second because both Scott and AJ have kind of referenced the data, and Scott talked about a triangulation with many kinds of data. AJ talked about this sort of noise around this and understanding the good from the bad. What are the benefits of open source intelligence when it comes to modern legal operations?
We're seeing, well, benefits, huge benefits. Getting access to data is the first one. You've got to think about that data. You're accessing domestic and global publicly available information, right? Billions of data points, millions of data sources, news streams, search engines, people and company databases, social media, sanctions, watch lists, the dark web, the scary dark web. And in our instance, we're translating 194 languages as well. So as far as the data goes, you're in good shape. But with that capability, with open source intelligence, with the firms that we're working with, they're enhancing their due diligence process. So during mergers, acquisitions, or partnerships, OSINT helps verify those reputations, right? Uncover red flags, undisclosed affiliations, or past legal issues for individuals or companies. It's also, improving the risk management and compliance posture. Think about regulatory monitoring. Firms can track changes in laws, regulations, enforcement patterns in different jurisdictions, but also KYC and AML checks, looking at those public records and social media sanctions and news sources to aid in that screening and assessment process. Some other areas: crisis management, reputational management, threat management. Can track media and social networks to detect potential risks on the firm. That could be your officers or your people, and we're helping them identify those potential threats. And one more, Ari. Sorry, I can talk about this for days, mate. As you know, e-discovery, open source intelligence and e-discovery. So accelerating that process for the collection of digital evidence, the posts, the videos, the forums, the online content, undisclosed assets and activities. It's incredibly powerful.
You're speaking my language. Yeah.
If I could add to
yes,
that,
please, Scott.
I think that this is, when I spent the first half of my year exclusively in cyber. That's how I came up through the ranks. And when I left the government, the one key component that I missed the most, and it's important, is actually threat intelligence, right? So in order, we all know, so I'm not trying to preach, but risk, you have to have vulnerability, and you times that time you have to have a threat. So not having threat meant you had to guess. You had to do a lot of guesswork because there's thousands and thousands of published vulnerabilities, but it's a balancing game. And that is, I totally agree with all of Matt's comments with respect to the benefits, but a very big one is getting that threat intelligence. That helps an organization focus their efforts where they need to be the most. And so the better that OSINT is, right? So by leveraging, data sources, multiples, et cetera, they're going to be able to provide you better. That's going to be able to tie into your risk equation, and you would think that you would increase your effectiveness of this.
Yeah. Based on what Matt had just said and AJ's point about the noise, in terms of providing meaningful threat intelligence, how should decision makers at firms like yours and others where they have to make this choice distinguish between certain applications and tools that offer threat intelligence capabilities?
Well, I think there's a couple things, right? So one, there's threat intelligence about what bad actors are doing and how they're planning and what they do when they target you. But there's other applications for OSINT as well, right? So if you remember last year, I think Gwyneth Paltrow, she had a court case that was settled. She was in a skiing accident in 2016 with a doctor, and he was suing her for like $3 million because his quality of life had been diminished, right? Meanwhile, if you looked at his social media, which Gwyneth Paltrow's team did, you would see that he was going diving in like Indonesia and things like that, right? And taking all these like lavish vacations around the world. Like, I wish my quality of life was diminished that badly that I could go skiing in the Alps, right? So open source is not just really around threat intelligence as well. There's a lot of information you can figure out around the parties that you're dealing with as well.
And in terms of the tools, Scott, just wondering how to, in a law firm in particular, but in large organizations, how do you distinguish the tools that you might need for this?
And again, so this transcends, I think most of these questions, they transcend all industries, right? So first and foremost, so, it's not that legal is, special with respect. We might have a bigger target on our backs because of what we do, but in essence, these things we're talking about, they transcend all industries. So, with respect to tools, because there's so many tools out there, which I think your question was, how do I really determine which ones we're going to get the most value? Well, and first, I'd say you have to have, what are your requirements? What are the gaps that you're trying to solve for? And you're hoping to gain that from a tool. So being able to have those kind of discussions with tools, and it's not too dissimilar to how we go through product selection today. But now when we're talking about cyber, we have some different or very specific requirements we're hoping to get together. So again, keeping with the theme of AI, and I would even say advanced technologies. And I think it was AJ that mentioned, AI is a very loaded, it means so many different things. And often people are talking about advanced technologies that really aren't even AI. It's analytics or it's automation or it's these other things. But my point being is then being able to assess those tools, looking at their roadmap. So I think today it's more important than ever to not just understand what the functionality of a particular tool is that you're doing, but to dive into what is that organization's roadmap. Because there's this term rapid obsolescence, and I wrote an article on this going on almost 2 years ago. That's what we're seeing a lot of. That's why I mentioned understanding a vendor's roadmap. What are they? What do they got today? Where are they hoping to be tomorrow? Because those are some of the things that are going to extend the shelf life. One of the things that IT folks don't like to have to do is swap out technologies all the time. But we're seeing that happens today with AI because of this thing I call rapid obsolescence. It is just things are happening so fast. And again, back to my point, the bad guys are using this stuff. We have no choice but to use these same technologies to counter those threats.
Yeah,
AJ,
and
yeah,
cash is showing up whether you want to or not, right? So you need to have a plan on how to address it, right? It's on your smartphones, it's in Grammarly, it's in your CRM, it's everywhere, right? So
what about this sort of issue of balancing all of the safety concerns, the data protection concerns, and yet the idea that in professional services generally, especially in law, time really matters. And so the more time you take for maybe some precautionary move, the less ability you might have to focus or to bill. How do you balance that? How can leaders, what are your suggestions for how leaders balance that? That's to AJ.
Yep. So I think AI gives you a number of advantages, right? You can, look at vast amounts of data and summarize it and come to some conclusions, right? But there's a reason why Microsoft calls their AI Copilot and not autopilot. You need to have a human in the loop to really kind of validate what those results are, right? So there's this concept of AI drift and hallucinations where the AI's output is only as good as the data that's put in there. So you have to make sure what you're providing it is relevant and useful information and not just noise. But from a decision-making perspective and a risk perspective, you need to take a look and see at those outputs. And the best AIs will actually highlight, here's the sources of the data that I use to make this output, and then you can go back and check it yourself, right? So it was in the FBI, we had this concept of trust but verify. That's even more so true now with AI.
Yeah. And if I can just add, AJ's spot on there. And, and that, this whole concept of hallucinations, it's obviously real. But it goes to if I give you a tool and I don't teach you how to use it, probably bad things are going to happen. And hallucinations are one of those because the more skilled you are, I would say you diminish that significantly. So, that's just, but this term of grounding. So, you also said the drift. So, grounding that data, knowing what the data points that the AI is leveraging, so you know that it's good because data quality affects everything, right? So we can't, forget about that. But let's just say, so grounded data, and then that gives you the ability to validate. So you want a tool that's going to say, here is where I pulled that from. So I can quickly go to that and I can validate that that is in fact real. It's not a hallucination. And it is something that I can deal with. It is something that it's actionable, right? So, but AJ is bringing up great points as well.
AJ, I love you started with when I was with the FBI, I should do that. When I was in the CIA, I think that's great credibility and great points. I also find it fascinating, this discussion of AI drift, rapid obsolescence, the need to validate data and all the different data types. So, Matt, where should legal teams begin integrating open source intelligence workflows to streamline their work without adding friction that it sounds like it's possible when you have existing processes that are navigating different data streams?
Absolutely. We don't want the friction. And look, initially when we started working with legal teams around open source intelligence, they'd be coming to us at the back end of a process, whether it be a due diligence process, final check relating to an M&A transaction, maybe final days of preparation on a matter. And it's at that point that we're uncovering the red flags, the risks, the content that could potentially affect a transaction going through or changing the trajectory of a matter. So, our advice was that's friction. It's too late in the process. We need to get it up front. So we see OSINT now, whether it's outsourcing as a service or whether it's in-house, that's where you start, right? Let's uncover as much information as possible that's going to empower the team and the firm to make the right decisions, not weeks or months down the track when you've got potential time wasted on a certain case that you're working on.
Matt, are there unusual sort of types of OSINT or types of intelligence in this way that are emerging in this moment? For example, I can imagine prompts or, I know that law firms are starting to categorize or maintain or library certain types of data that didn't exist, certainly when I was practicing and even just a few years ago. Just wondering, how do you track that?
I guess the benefit you've got, look, there's a variance in different OSINT tools, right? Some folks think that getting onto Google or getting onto Facebook and having a search, well, that's open source intelligence. Well, hey, the reality is that there's a variance of tools that are available in the market. What we're taking to market is tech that's been built many, many years ago for national security, intelligence, and defense and law enforcement capability, and we're commercializing it to support across multiple industries, one of them being legal. Having access to significant data sets, curated data sets of known entities, bad actors. We talked about the threat intelligence before, right, that Scott was mentioning and AJ was mentioning. So having access to those data sets for us is a very, very powerful competitive edge in the market compared to, hey, I've just got watch lists or I've just got sanctions lists or I've just got people that are on a bad credit list. Leaning into those to glean a more informed and rich picture for the firm to make decisions is pretty powerful, and we find that's a strong advantage.
Scott, let's dig into the practical and tactical aspects of some of these issues. How has your team used AI or other advanced intelligence tools to improve its legal risk management?
Yeah, so again, it really, with respect to AI, what are we doing internal to us? We built out our own platform, so we leverage that, but really, how are we applying that to these kind of areas? One simple one would be, when you have all of these different tools as part of your overall security program, and you're getting information from them in the form of, I don't want to say incidents because we use that term, that obviously triggers certain things, but let's just say events. And depending on the size of your organization, those could be significant, the volume. So, and even though I know that probably 98% of them are going to be nothing, I have to provide a certain amount of diligence to all of them. Because, again, a common term, bad guy only has to get it right. We have to get it right every time. So the ability to leverage AI to help intelligently go through that list so that I can further prioritize, I can further assess and analyze that so that I find that needle in the haystack, so to speak. And again, because this is all about timing, right? So that I know I need to apply resources to a particular activity, and I need to do that sooner than I would have been before, because I am leveraging, again, I'm going to probably say advanced technologies, because the AI can kind of identify automation can be used to make sure that I am aware quicker than I was before. Because Matt and AJ that are really into this, that is their daily job. I think we all could agree that time is of the essence when we are dealing. Let's just say writable, right? We've got to be able to make quick decisions based on good data.
And is it fair to say that the threats are coming faster because the bad actors are also leveraging AI as much as you're leveraging it to respond and identify and accelerate? They are doing the same thing on the opposite end.
If I can, yeah, the answer, as far as I'm concerned, is yes. I think they're advancing their skills at the same level as we're advancing our skills, and so it definitely has an impact. The level of sophistication that is definitely going up. The ability to use AI to come up with a really, really intelligent phishing attack is like no other time. Where I can go out on the internet and I can pull down your annual report and all of the different documents associated with that. I can look at all your news feeds out on your website. I can start doing all this stuff. I can put that into a database. I'm the bad guy now. And I can have AI come up with some real custom, believable phishing attempts. That's what it's all about. Making that end user believe that this is really who I'm trying to get them to think. And you get that data at a degree that we've never had before. Or I should say, quick, you could do all that stuff manually, right? I could have 12 people that are just dealing with this. I'm limited to their creativity. AI can be very creative in putting together an attack. So that's one thing. They're using these tools very, very well.
Yeah,
AJ,
I
yeah, I
would
was
agree with that, and I would add on to that bad guys have been leveraging technology much faster than network defenders have been in the past, right? Because we have compliance and regulatory issues and have to go through procurement and all these other things. Where as a bad actor, I can basically buy a ransomware kit or a phishing site, things like that.
Right.
So AI makes it even easier. I don't have to know how to code anymore because I can vibe code, which I can just basically prompt the AI with what my intended outcome is. And I can build a site that looks like LinkedIn, for example, right? And do it in about 25, 30 minutes. So the technology is there. They're definitely leveraging it. And so we need to, up our skill level as well as they are.
You got me thinking about the idea of having procurement for the hackers and what that would look like, what that process is, the contracting process, getting budget for
Yeah, I
some
tell you what,
nefarious
studying
activity.
some of these, ransomware as a service groups, they have better customer support than we have here in the US for our own telecom providers, man. They have like chat groups and things like that. Hey, it's not working. How do I fix it? And they're Johnny on the spot.
Ransomware as a service. That's fascinating. But AJ, what does that mean for the relationship? So the relationship between legal operations and cyber threat modeling to improve business processes while maintaining this level of protection that seems increasingly at risk. How is that relationship changing?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So yeah, what we look at is basically doing a weather forecast for the internet, right? So, living in Florida, I appreciate the fact that we can see hurricanes, 5 days to a week out in their path and where they're going, so I can protect myself and my family, right? 100 years ago, you walk outside, you look at the sky, it's gonna be a good day tomorrow, and then you're wiped out, right? We couldn't grow crops as well as we could. Maybe you want some rain, you do a rain dance or you make a prayer, right? Today we have 100 years of threat modeling, not threat modeling, weather modeling, right? So we can see based on ocean temperatures, upper level air currents and things like that, how things are going to kind of basically pan out over the next few days, right? So what we look at is, okay, so bad actors have done X, Y, and Z in the past. How do we take that and look at it at scale, right? So from a threat modeling perspective, we take samples of the internet every 6 to 10 times an hour and see how things have changed over time, right? So as a human, you can't really absorb and synthesize that data and go through it, right? But what we can do with our predictive AI is we take it the same way that people used to make cartoons, right? You draw a picture, and you draw another one slightly different, another one slightly different. And if you move through it fast enough, you have motion, right? So that's what our AI does. It takes all of this data and it looks how things change over time. And so it looks like a real ecosystem, right? So, and we can see again where things are starting to shape up as being malicious. We can kind of narrow that down in things that are focusing on specific organizations. So things that are targeting my agency or my company. And there's other events that may raise your risk profile, right? So for one of our customers, they brought us in because they were going through an M&A. They were merging with their biggest rival, right? So they were in, they call it the hydration business, so water, right? And during that process, they had to go through SEC compliance and other regulatory filings, and their risk profile came up because they're more in the news, they're more public and things like that. And so what we saw was like bad actors were trying to take advantage of their brands and masquerading as them. And so we were able to identify those things early before they sent the phishing site to the accounting team that, hey, you got to pay this backdated invoice or whatever else it was. And then they had another event where they had a social media influencer who, as part of his daily wellness routine, would take one of their sparkling water brands, put it in a bowl, and put his face in it, right? And so then others started like mimicking that, and so it became a meme and things like that. Well, the threat actors were like, "Hey, this is becoming popular now," and so they basically masqueraded as that brand to like a company name .xyz, and we're basically pointing people to these products which were not sanctioned by the company. There were, other kind of wellness pills and things like that. When that becomes a trust and safety issue, right? Because, as that company, you have no control over that. What the bad guys are doing, they're using your brand, they're using your name, and they're selling, snake oil basically, or something that actually could probably be malicious to you, right? So there's a lot um, to be able to address through AI. And it covers everything from your due diligence process, like Scott was talking about, for M&A to trust and public safety, right?
Matt, I'm fascinated by what we're talking about. The idea of ransomware as a service, AI drift, rapid obsolescence. It's just so many different pieces that are moving all at the same time and seem to be accelerating in their movement. What are the most common ways that you see clients deploy OSINT, and are there some that they're not thinking about?
Yeah, probably the most common is, that deepest level of due diligence, on individuals or organizations. Who am I engaging with? Who are the beneficial owners? Who are they connected to? Are they connected to nefarious groups? Do we have risk for money laundering, proceeds of crime? Are we onboarding a new client or a new employee? And we find that 8 years ago on a social media platform, they're quoting 3 words from an Al Qaeda bomb making magazine. It's these little things. That's the, I guess, the most common that we're seeing as an application. What are people not thinking about? And I guess, let's stop talking about what's on the tin and talk about some real use cases, as the gentlemen have. Recently we're supporting a firm who was representing quite a large insurance company in the US, who were focusing on some workers' compensation claims. They thought there was a challenge around a particular individual and network of individuals making claims. So we got involved to help them. They'd spent 200 hours. So the insurance company spent 200 hours investigating one individual. We solved it in 45 minutes, similar to AJ's reference earlier about that celebrity. Getting online, finding people's aliases, finding who they're connected to, finding those images, where they are, what they're doing, publicly available information. It's out there for you to consume. But 200 hours is 45 minutes. Quick outcomes, great outcome for the firm in the end. But there are, these little nuances that we can apply that folks aren't thinking about that we sort of bring to the table for them.
Hmm. Note to self, release and destroy all aliases of Ari
Yeah.
Kaplan. Very good point there, Matt. Thank you very much. Hey, Scott, did you
Yeah.
want to say something? I thought I saw
I
you.
just
Yeah.
wanted to add to that, because really, Matt's talking about this, but that's, as far as countering insider threat, which is still a very big thing, right? So not only can OSINT help you with your due diligence when you're onboarding a new employee, but often, that might be the only, or let's just say limited background investigation you do on that. And they were good to go. when that happened. But a week later, they did something that if you knew about, you wouldn't have been able to hire them in the first place because you may have contractual requirements with clients that wouldn't allow you to employ that type of person. So this really allows you to, again, it's timely, relevant action. It's ongoing. It's running in the background, and the value that it is providing you is significant. And so just that insider threat is another component to that, because how does that relate, right? Someone did something that now they're vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And I need to know that, because I just need to know that before something bad potentially.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, like what people would put on social media, right? So I worked a case a few years ago in a southern state here in the U.S. where drugs were being brought into penitentiaries, right? And they couldn't figure out like exactly how all of these things were happening. And come to find out that there was like specific guards at these different agencies who have no other connections at all, but they were in the same Facebook group, right? And so they were funneling in drugs and had been tagged by a cartel down and out of Latin America. So yeah, it's social media and open source intelligence is a treasure trove of information. But again, just like with AI and the data, you have to be able to look at it, consume it, and synthesize it very quickly, right? As Matt says, take something that takes 200 hours and do it in 45 minutes.
Earlier, you referenced this point about buying or building, and the more I have conversations with leaders about artificial intelligence or other emerging technologies, buy-in becomes a very meaningful point in addition to adoption. So how can leaders more effectively secure buy-in for new tools and overcome the common issues of integrating the new tools with an array of applications that already exist in the enterprise?
Was that to me?
Yes, to you, Scott.
Yeah. So, again, I think this goes with respect to any new advanced technology tool that we want to bring in. And so what we've employed, because adoption is a huge issue. I mean, that's one of the things that you go to any AI conferences, there are going to be at least a couple discussions about adoption. What we've done, and I think we've done very well with respect to adoption, is so we showcase. So when there was an idea and we put it in our intake and it made sense because it reduced risk and revenue margin, the common things. So we did this. So then what we do is we showcase it. We showcase it to the broader audience so that they can see, because, I can put them through training. I can teach them how to use generative AI. I can teach them how to do prompt engineering and things of that nature. But sometimes they still just can't put that together with a practical use case. So we take these use cases and we demo them. And the other key component of that is I'm not the one that demos it. It's not coming from IT, or it's not coming from the security guy. It is coming from the actual end user that we solved a problem for them. That has had the most impact on us getting even additional ideas for opportunity. And then the second thing is because we get a lot of just anecdotal comments, an email or in the hall. Hey, I use AI now and it saves me an hour and a half a week. Well, you know what? That might not sound much to most, but take that times 52. Take that times, let's just say 50% of your organization that might be using it. Now, all of a sudden, that's huge. And what does that create? That creates capacity for those individuals to do something different. I'll just leave it at that because it's a whole other topic. But so we do that, and it has proved out to be very beneficial for us to get additional budget, for us to get additional resources to do it, because we are actually demonstrating value from these technologies through a use case that they can relate to. And I think you can use that for anything. That is a simple recipe, and it's not a new thing. That's product management 101. Again, we forget that these things have already been worked out in other industries for other technologies. We employ those things at Buchanan, and we've had a lot of success as a result.
I like that.
So can I put you on the spot? Should you buy or build or rent? What's the preferred model in 2025?
That again for me?
Yeah, to you, Scott. Just
It,
yeah.
that all depends. I mean, honestly, we're finding that in some instances, it's just faster and obviously more economical for us to build things. And I'd say AI is kind of shifted where we internally here at Beacon, we are building more and more things because it's easier for us to do than to commercialize it and then worry about, yeah, this might have been the best product today, but 6 months from now, they didn't keep up. I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't look at their roadmap, and now it's obsolete, and I have to purchase something else, and then all the time and effort goes into retrofitting things of that nature. But then there's this other thing, and that is the concept of what I call rent. And sometimes you're not renting, it's free, but it's the ability to tap into these data sources that I maybe never was able to before. And I can because that enhances the platform that we've either commercially bought or we've built, or it's a hybrid, it's a combination thereof. So that's why I mentioned that rent component too. The ability to be able to take data from other sources. That goes back to our triangulation. Now I can take primary data, I can take secondary data, I can take tertiary data that I trust. Back to AJ's point, you have to understand, you have to have some level of trust with these things so that you can ground it and you can validate it. But that's my kind of answer to that.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. So a lot of the conversations that I've had with CIOs and CTOs and CISOs has been really more around, am I buying an AI or am I buying an outcome, right? So what is it that I want to get out of this? And generally it comes to an outcome, right? So let the AI experts build their technology, build their tools, and then we can leverage that with our data sets, right? So, but then that comes into a second question. If Pfizer and Moderna are both using Copilot to train on all of their data, well, is the version of Copilot that Moderna is training going to have its learnings pushed over into Pfizer, so they're going to be more efficient, right? So have a plan, have hopefully your own enclave and your own instance of Copilot, which is available through Microsoft and things like that. So make sure that the things that you're doing in your training is not necessarily going to support your competitors, right? Or competimates in some instances. And the other thing is, to Scott's point, technology is going to rapidly advance, right? So the same tool and training and Copilot today is not going to be the same Copilot 6 months from now. So you may not lose anything by not starting today, but you're definitely not gaining anything by not leveraging it.
Well, this comes up, there's a very interesting phenomenon going on right now in terms of schizophrenic policymaking when it comes to client data. Lots of law firms have policies, clients have policies, and they keep shifting as people realize the benefits and are able to minimize the risks. But AJ, to your point, how should leaders then address client audits of some type that are focused on making sure their data is not used in training their competitor in a broad-based firm LLM?
Yeah, so I think for sure you need to set boundaries on what you're going to look at, right? You don't want to just put a bunch of client spreadsheets and Excel documents and data into your generic Chat GPT or whatever else, right? So people are going to try and use the tools, so why not get ahead of that and have boundaries and guidelines around here? This is our tool. All the data stays in house or in our own private cloud. So use this and then get your results that way, right? So it's definitely a anticipate the problem, figure out the solution, and then give the tools to people because they're going to use it whether you want them to or not, right? Like Grammarly is a great example of that. Like I can have it in my Outlook, I can have it in my my Chrome browser or whatever else. But if I put something into Grammarly, where does it go? Like I have no control over that, right? So make sure you are putting some very specific guidelines around how you're using AI. Deloitte, for example, they don't allow their consultants to use any type of AI that is not their own, right? So they've got their own internal instance of Copilot.
Matt, what types of legal threats or blind spots does conventional due diligence typically miss?
Conventional due diligence, the standard checks Well, they're not enough. That's the problem, right? They're not enough. And I'll give you a real world example. We were supporting a firm out of New York recently, and a big blind spot we're finding today is domestic and foreign investment or domestic and foreign transactions, right? This particular firm was looking to spend and transact 9 figures on plant and equipment. The individuals in the organisation, they believed that they were dealing with were out of London, but they weren't. They were part of a sophisticated fraud network out of Russia, which is incredible. And, a lot of people on the call today, and Scott and AJ and myself certainly see a lot of this from week to week, but a sophisticated group, big fraud. That transaction was about to go through. We were lucky, and they were lucky. They got introduced to us a week before that transaction was supposed to occur. They stopped that transaction, obviously, but it's just these little nuances again around what we can find and what we can detect around threats and risk that pop up, and to support folks.
Yeah, I want to try to take us to what people should do now. Given the fact that there's been this sea change, we've seen an acceleration, we've seen increased complexity, higher risk. Where should leaders prioritize their efforts to stay ahead of risk, but not just, we are in this uncertain economy, we're in a shifting regulatory landscape. There are a lot of concerns in a lot of organizations. Where should leaders start prioritizing their efforts to stay ahead?
I would, so let me take a stab at this. And again, this is all going to depend on what type of business you're in, right? So if you're in a heavy regulated space, a lot of compliance related, so law firms, for instance, I would say the priority would be enhancing, compliance frameworks, regulatory frameworks. So first and foremost, investing in technologies that automates compliance tracking can drastically improve an organization's ability to just stay out ahead of these changes that if you don't pay attention to, it could be very costly. And so that was what I meant. And if you're an international organization, keeping up with all of the regulations and the requirements that are geographically dependent. That is where I would say that should be a high priority for organizations that depend on knowing that information. So, and that's again, AI makes that easier than ever. Just keeping up on those things. And obviously you have to build it, but it can be done, and the benefits and the value can be immediate.
Yeah, I think you can even use AI right now to go out and say, hey, ChatGPT, what kind of governance should I put around AI usage, right? And it'll give you a pretty good framework, right? So
Right.
use AI to govern AI, right? And so
Right.
as long as you're providing those guidelines to your employees, right, then you're able to keep your data safe, your client data safe, and not worry about it, being just kind of shared out openly or, again, used to be training your competitors, right? So.
I've heard that. That's pretty interesting, AJ, of using AI to, because I've heard people say, if you're not sure of the prompt, ask AI what prompt based on your challenge you should give to make this a successful process. And so that's a really important sort of general point. Scott has mentioned that. Yeah.
That again comes back from my FBI time, right? Where I would be in an interview or interrogation, and I would actually ask somebody, it's like, so what question should I have asked you that I didn't ask you? A lot of times people will volunteer that information. So.
To be helpful. What about guidance? AJ, just to add to that point, what guidance would you offer to legal teams who are starting this process of exploring predictive AI and other types of machine learning for threat response?
Yeah, so I think, if you go back to your own kind of data governance principles, that's a good foundation to start, right? So where can your data be used? Where can it not be used? What is protected versus not protected? So there is a continuing problem in cybersecurity where users are overprivileged. So if you have an AI that's acting as a user, it can pull all the social security numbers or all the credit card data you have across your entire organization, which is not something that you want to happen, right? So making sure that you have very tight guidelines around what the AI can look at, what it can bring, and who can use it is definitely kind of the first step. And really, again, you build those frameworks out, educate your end users. Here's what you can use AI for. Here's what you can't use it for. And these are the AIs that are approved by the organization, right? So as long as you have those things, you've at least put some type of a common framework around the organization's understanding of AI and how to leverage it. I don't know if Matt or Scott, you would agree with that.
AJ brought up an excellent point that I think we skirted around. I certainly did because I just assumed and I shouldn't do that. Having a governance model around all this is imperative. I mean, that is what's going to dictate how you build these things out, how you use them, how you leverage them, who gets to use them for what. You can't stress that enough. And again, so going back to adoption, just from a client allowing us to adopt these things, them knowing that we have these governance kind of controls in place, like, hey, I audit everything. It goes, every prompt that's generated, I know who did it. I know what the output was. There's value in that, right? Or if you work in a firm that does not authorize you to use anything other than our own internal, like us, we have controls in that, at least from our network, you can't get to any other. It will redirect you to our product we call Artifacts. Again, we have DLP built in, so like, if there is an opt-out, if a client contacts our general counsel and says you're not authorized at this point to use AI for any of our data, by the way, we want to know if you have. We're not stressed. We have the ability to do that because we built that was a part of our governance. We built that into our product, our platform from day one because we knew those were going to be requirements. I didn't need to wait for there to be this industry AI requirement document. Again, we implement technologies. We've been doing that. It's leading practices, and that will go a long way as well.
Matt, Scott and AJ have talked about the urgency of having a governance model, of enhancing compliance and regulatory frameworks with more automation for compliance tracking. How can legal teams overcome the challenges of all of these new tools, drive adoption, and empower this change management that's necessary to thrive?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's first and foremost, get proactive, right? Some folks have budget, want to include as part of their strategy to be bold and look at some new tools. Other folks say, hey, listen, I don't have the budget. I don't have the resources. I'll look at outsourcing it to you. We call it intelligence as a service. Scott calls it renting the data. Either way, you're proactive and you're enhancing, your team and your operation. So I think that's the first step. It's not difficult because whenever you start talking about tools, adoption and empowerment and change management, everyone either takes a breath, goes white, or grabs another wine. It's tough, but just be proactive and take that first step. There's a few options.
All right, we got a question. Someone messaged me with a couple of questions. I think this one is probably for Scott, which is, how much automation is enough but not too much? And I get the sense of this question because I've done a lot of research, both on the corporate side and on the law firm side, and there's a level of personal touch, sort of a white glove relationship that people try to preserve, but at the same time make as much turnkey and simple and obvious as possible. So I find that there's in some organizations, there's a threshold for, if we have too much automation, it eliminates the sort of personal connection. People want to know who the right person is to reach out to. And then the other end, you guys have both mentioned, you and AJ, that Scott, that having an automated tracking system will ensure compliance in every aspect. So I'm just wondering if there's a threshold that you've considered in terms of how much automation is the right amount.
I think you'd base that on value, right? Because a lot of things can be automated. but that doesn't mean they should be. So just start there. Just because something can be automated doesn't mean it should. And then even if you decided, there's probably an opportunity to re-engineer that process before you automate it too. If you automate a bad process, it's still a bad process. So that's first and foremost. Then there's different levels, right? There's enterprise level automation that's systematic, and then I call it job sharing. Then at the individual level, and I think this is again now next to a security engineer or security analyst, job sharing with a system that automates some things. It uses AI, and I think I just described agentic AI. I think those are going to be the perfect job share the opportunities that we have, and then analytics as well. So again, a lot of these things, it all depends. It all depends on the organization, what makes sense, but it comes back to value. Is it worth me doing this in the first place from a risk perspective, a revenue perspective, margin, or end user experience? So having a very strong, disciplined intake process where you take all these potential ideas and you assess them in a disciplined manner, you'll find out then what makes the most sense to leverage advanced technology into your example automation, and what maybe we should defer for a while because it's not high enough on the priority list.
Wow.
So
AJ,
it's a systematic answer to your question.
No, it's exactly the answer that I had hoped for. And I think that people who are listening are looking for. And I want to, AJ, a last word here. And I was wondering, are there any best practices, given the depth of your experience, that you've learned from other industries that we should consider applying in legal?
Yeah, so again, I think it all comes down to at some point there has to be a human in the loop, right? You cannot give all of your control over to an AI. For those of you who have been to San Francisco, have been in the Waymos that are these automatic drivers, you would see the difference between an Uber or a Lyft rideshare and a Waymo is the Waymo looks for the most optimal place to drop you off and pick you up versus a human who would pick you up as soon as they can find you and drop you off exactly where you need to be, right? So the thing for me with AI is it can help you get 95% of the way there, but you have to have that human in the loop to confirm, yeah, this is actually good information, right? I use it all the time, right? I have my, I get, tons and tons of email. I have, these massive threads, and my, Gemini and my G Suite can basically summarize an email for me and let me know what the next action is, right? And so instead of having to go through and hunt and figure out what I have to do next, I can take a look at it, see what it says, and then I make my own distinction. I wouldn't have it write emails for me and respond for me because it's not going to be in my own voice, but definitely can leverage that. But at the end of the day, I think there has to be a human in the loop, to have that that trust but verify part of the equation.
Well, Scott Angelo, AJ Singh, Matt Winlaw, thank you all for joining me. And thanks to @Group for giving me the privilege of facilitating this conversation about how AI and open source intelligence are redefining risk and opportunity in legal operations.